Hangout on Air is now live. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Talking About Survivor. I'm Christiana Ellis, and with me is Mike Mayteen.
Hello.
After a little bit of bizarre technical difficulty, we're ready to talk about Survivor Second Chance, Ep08. So, this was a weird episode for me because I didn't watch it last night. I watched it after work today, but in the meantime, I got spoiled by Twitter accidentally. And so what I knew going in was only two things. One, that Savage was the one that was voted out. And two, that there's lots of talk about balls. And it was not only from Mike's instant message, although just for all the listeners at home, I did receive a message at 10:36 p.m. last night saying, "Going to say this now so we don't spend too much time on our podcast. Joe's balls are moving. Joe's balls are moving. Keith's balls remain steady."
He did say it a number of times.
Oh, yes, he did. I was kind of wondering, watching it, because kind of halfway through, he kind of started saying it in a different way, and I was wondering if, like, he caught himself or if it was unrelated. But, of course, in the Q&A that he does with Dalton Ross, he said that, well, of course he knew that it sounded funny, and he was actually kind of leaning into it because it's funny.
It was funny. It was childish, but
yeah,
I kept giggling every time he would say it.
I kept looking every time they would cut to the people on the bench. I was trying to see if I could catch any of them giggling, but I didn't notice any. I also wasn't freeze framing it or anything. But yeah, the Savage thing, knowing that going into the episode was kind of fascinating because, like, up until the last minute, it was like, Savage, like, how could that possibly happen? Like, it just increasingly, I kept waiting for it to turn in a way that would make that seem even remotely likely, and it kept not happening until just before they were actually going to vote. I guessed what was going to happen. But I wouldn't have guessed it if I hadn't already known what the outcome was going to be. So all I guessed was how it could happen.
And see, for me, it was, I don't want to say it was wishful thinking that Savage would go, because I like him most of the time. He does. I do maintain that he plays better from a position not of power.
Agreed.
He's kind of a bully when he's in a power position. But I was rooting for them to get the idol thing right, because you felt like they knew they needed to use it, and they needed to be sure which one of them it was. Clearly, that was pretty easy to figure out since everyone except like the two of them voted for Wentworth. So I think it was pretty obvious who was going. Like, I don't think that they had to really roll. I don't think she was really rolling the dice. I think she knew.
Right.
And that it was just the realization that they were right.
Yeah.
That made her so excited and like fist bumping and stuff like that.
The thing is, though, they had more than enough people to split the vote.
Yep.
And so it was only her expertise and excellent play of not letting them have any idea that she had an idol, to the point where they felt safe enough proceeding without splitting the vote, even though they could have. Obviously, in hindsight, they should have. But in this case, I think it was, by splitting the vote, there's just enough vulnerability. There's just enough anxiety that, well, gosh, if we split the vote, then only one person, or maybe two, depending on who it is, would need to flip over to vote with the minority three to screw it up. Yeah. And we're not sure enough.
That's definitely true. And there is very likely some people that might have taken up that offer if that was the case. If it wasn't a true majority vote. It was just a majority decision. There are some people that were willing to rock that boat and knock out somebody, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Joe, for one, like, because now all of a sudden Joe can get his Steven thing done. You know, if you're splitting the votes between those two girls, you just go grab the three girls and you say, hey, let's get rid of Steven.
Savage wanted to get rid of Steven too.
Yep.
And even though
Savage would have gone against the Savage, I don't think he would have gone against the vote split, which would have been truly going like against the majority's decision. I don't know if he was ready to do that. Because he had settled himself on, we're going to play old school now, and we're just going to stay strong.
Yeah. He seemed like he's best buds with Joe, though, so maybe Joe could have talked him into it. But you're right. We don't have any way to know. But in any case, they must have been sufficiently confident that Wentworth didn't have an idol, or that there wasn't going to be an idol that would be in play and complicate things, that they felt like they could get by without splitting the vote. You know, the balance of, well, we don't think she has one, and we're worried enough that if we split, that could go wrong. So let's not split. But then, of course, this is the time where they absolutely should have, and it backfired on them. They chose poorly.
Yep.
So in any case, though, that all happens at the end of the episode. Let's rewind back to the beginning of the episode, while Savage and Jeremy talk about their brilliant plan executed to perfection, by which they mean the majority voted out the easy target. Yeah, you know. I don't know. It's you know, I guess it could have gone some other ways that time, but you know, I think they're mostly being self-congratulatory that you know, things seem to be going well, which is reasonable. I just, you know, it didn't really feel like some intricate scheme that they carried off.
But that's what we learned later from Savage, is that is what he wanted. That is the plan that he wanted to execute. Was he wanted to stop all of this scheming. He wanted the majority to just pick off the easy targets and let him and his bros, you know, go to the end.
Yeah. So
people keep messing that up for him.
I know, they're so mean. Although, like, I never would have guessed Savage to go. And so that's why this episode was so weird watching it. Just kept waiting for anyone to even be talking about voting for Savage. And it was way towards the end before anyone even said his name, and it still wasn't clear how they'd be able to do that. But I knew that something must happen. So, you know, but I never, like, if I hadn't watched it knowing, I don't think I ever would have guessed that was what was going to happen. I might have been thinking, well, gosh, you know, Kelly could use her idol if she knows she's the target. So, you know, it wasn't outside the realm of possibility, but I still don't think I would have predicted it, because I didn't figure that aspect of it out until way towards the end. Even though, or not, you know, in hindsight, they reminded us that she had the idol earlier in the episode.
Yes, and they spent time at Tribal discussing how
nobody's talking about it. Yeah,
nobody's talking about it. They're assuming they're either found or there aren't any, or
if they just sort of feel like collectively we've done enough searching and nobody seems to be talking about it, that. And it is certainly true that it is a little bit unusual that both people who had the idols didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
I feel like usually they use it to try to, like, whoever's their closest ally, to try to bring them in a little closer, to let them know. And it's true in some ways that if you are relying on an alliance, giving them that bit of information helps them to make the right strategy moves too. But on the other hand, in this case, who knows, if Sierra had known, maybe it could have ended up slipping, or there might have been an argument over which one of them is really the target. Do they both get to try it? You know, who knows? But in any case, it's Sierra that's the focus initially. Savage talks about Sierra wanting to lead the girls against the guys, despite there being fewer girls than guys.
And wasn't she one of the people that like specifically like, no, it was Kimmy that really got that, like rebuffed that when
Monica suggested it.
But I think Sierra might have been around at that time and also not. I feel like she was, but I don't remember.
Well, what's interesting,
not perfect recall of the show.
Yeah. What's interesting, I think, is that isn't really what Sierra's plan was anyway. You know what I mean? It's like, to some extent, this trio of Kelly Wentworth, Kelly Wigglesworth, and Sierra, or no, excuse me, not Wigglesworth, but Abby is the third there. They're not like hanging out together because they're plotting. I mean, it seems like they just kind of have realized that they're at the low end of the totem pole. And is it possible that they're kind of being treated as low end of the totem pole partly because everyone's worried that they're plotting?
No, I think that everyone else has built bonds with people that are more similar to them and that they want to be around. I don't think anybody thinks, that's not what feeling I got. I feel like these other people just solidified these relationships and that left them out.
Yeah. So this next conversation is Sierra trying to connect with Steven. And this did not remotely go the way that I thought it would. Because when she is talking about, hey, Steven, I think it's the right time to try to get Joe out. And instead of him saying, I totally had the same idea, let's make it happen, he's acting kind of non-committal to them. And I mean, obviously Joe wins immunity later, takes that option off the table anyway. But Steven is so non-committal to her that she is left at the end feeling like he is definitely on the other side. He's part of the whole power structure over there.
Yes.
So instead of revealing to her that he's a possible ally, he makes her think that he's on the other side. So she probably wouldn't approach him again, even though she wants the same thing he's been trying to make happen all along.
Yeah,
because
right.
Because, you know, at the end, like when the three girls are talking about, oh, I think we should vote together, but who should it be, Savage or Steven? Like, Steven could be, you know, a double agent for them, theoretically, except he ended up making them think that he's not available.
Yeah, I hadn't put that together. That makes sense.
Of course, it's also possible that...
Of course it makes sense.
Well, no, that's not what I was meaning to say.
I know, you didn't. Yeah, it's just that's what I heard when you said, of course.
What I was intending to convey is that it may be possible that he wants Joe out, but not in a way that will alienate his other alliance members. What he wants is to convince, say, Jeremy to vote out Joe, and not to leave the alliance, to betray the alliance in order to make it happen, only to be then left at the mercy of this alliance that still has the numbers and now is mad.
Yes.
But in any case, I was surprised that he was not more receptive when she was pitching him on the idea that he's been pitching to us in confessionals for 3 episodes now. So that's really all we had before that first challenge, reward challenge with got to retrieve floating blocks and then a puzzle in order to win bagels and cookies and stuff. I thought it was interesting that they didn't talk about this specific challenge being on some previous season, but instead that it was just it's another paddling challenge, like a previous paddling challenge, instead of it being the whole challenge is a repeat. I thought, not that that's a big deal or anything, but it was just a departure from the pattern.
Yeah, that's true. We've been talking about that. So.
It seemed like they still kind of wanted to make it sound like it wasn't that much of a departure. Bringing up Wigglesworth losing to the guy who can't swim, and then of course when she wins, like he specifically asks her about it, and it's, continues this trend of we're setting you up with an anecdote. So how do you feel about it? Well, of course it feels good. All right then. Okay, moving on.
Yes, which is why she's not getting a ton of screen time.
Yeah.
Because they teed her up for it, and she still was like, yeah, that's cool.
Mm-hmm. I mean, she was happy. She's just very, I was going to say taciturn, but that taciturn feels like it's sort of a, like a severe emotion along with not speaking.
Yeah.
Where she's a woman of few words, apparently. In any case, it was pretty even at the turn, but then Joe was pretty successful in just pushing the other boat off course by just getting his paddle on there and just pushing them out of the way. I thought that was pretty great. You could just see all of them, like Stephen was kind of up front, so he's who I noticed, but just kind of reacting in dismay of like, well, but wait, but I can't really think how that's not fair exactly, but it's certainly not what I wanted to happen. But in any case, as is typical with these challenges that end with a puzzle, both tribes are working on the puzzle at the same time. They catch up. And Bion, in particular, they even claim to have solved it first, but they're wrong.
They are wrong. That happens a lot too in these, because when you're behind, you rush to judgment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to just like, oh, if we think we've got it, let's call, because we don't want to take 15 extra seconds to be 100% sure and then have the other tribe call Jeff over first. Because you really don't lose much by having him come over and look, other than just maybe embarrassment and maybe loss of momentum, perhaps. But if you already think you've got it. But in any case, they did not got it, and the other tribe actually wins. So the winning team was Keith, Kimmy, Sierra, Wigglesworth, Wentworth, and Joe. And Stephen was worried about Joe being on the reward with all those girls, and I couldn't help but think, like, but Sierra just pitched you on getting rid of Joe. She's on the same page.
She was until you rebuffed her. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I wondered what exactly Stephen was worried about, but then I also just realized that I think he just kind of worries. He just worries generally.
Yes, he worries generally. He was also just upset that he didn't get on the reward. Like,
yeah. So yeah, and we had him having his low moment, but we went on the reward first with the winning team. Sierra is all primed to make excellent use of this reward time, which is, a nice cut to after Stephen expressing worry. Just her basically saying, yeah, yep, that's exactly what we're going to do. It's an excellent time to bond and talk strategy in a more relaxed environment when everybody's happy and in a good mood.
Yeah, and, people weren't accepting of my pitch to get rid of Joe, so maybe I'll
figure something out
to Joe.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll work with Joe if nobody wants to get rid of him.
Mm-hmm. And then of course she kind of has to walk back a little bit of her speech at the previous tribal council. Just by what's funny about it, especially looking back, is this whole idea of like, so when I was complaining that nobody was playing for the end game, like I didn't mean like you guys. I just meant like in the abstract, because I know you guys are playing, and I didn't want you to be offended. And then, of course, later in the tribal council, she basically doubles down. It's like, no, they still won't. Which is kind of funny.
Yeah, she's funny to have around.
Yeah, I like her. So she's pointing out, though, at especially in terms of lobbying Joe, is just to say, look, Jeremy, Tasha, Steven, and Savage are really tight, and they know that they don't want to go to the end with you because they're not going to beat you. And so, and Joe is kind of, he knows Sierra has a point, and he recognizes also that, like, well, and at some point I'm going to have to make my move too, because otherwise, I'm already in a position where I'm going to have to win every challenge. So it's to my benefit to start getting some of the other good challenge people out eventually. But he actually also knows that, really when they're talking about this tight group that's not going to split on each other, really he's kind of in that group still. Even though there's discussion of possibly going after Joe, it's mostly from Steven's at this point. Everyone else there in that group seems to think that's a later decision.
Yes.
So let's see. Cortana keeps thinking I'm talking to her. So Keith gets playing around on that motorcycle pulled rickshaw thing. I guess they were saying it was a tuk-tuk.
Yes, they're called a tuk-tuk. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I had no knowledge of that before Survivor's saying that it was a tuk-tuk, but I'll take their word for it.
I think those are in Far Cry 4.
I did recognize them. They're very similar. I think they have a similar thing, but this one was a little different because it was a regular motorcycle up front, kind of hitched to the carriage thing. And I think they had ones where it was like built in rather than like a trailer hitch. Little three-wheel drive or three-wheel things.
Yeah, that's how they like normally are.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is still qualifies.
Yeah, well, I have no reason to doubt.
Yeah, that's what they normally look like.
Yeah. See, that's a little bit more what they look like. Oh, well, you talk so the picture will show you.
Yes, sorry. So that's what they look like in Far Cry 4, but that's what they typically look like. Like it's basically just like this three-wheel thing. But yeah, that's a tuk-tuk.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what they were, but yeah, they are. It was set up a little different because it had that motorcycle.
Yeah, it looked like it was a regular motorcycle that you could disconnect.
Yeah.
But in any case, Keith decided he wanted to play around on that, and then he gave everybody a little ride around the beach, and that was a fun little sequence. And I couldn't help but think, this is Keith's gameplay, and I don't mean it in terms of it being like this calculated move necessarily, but it just fits in with his strategy. His mode of operation in this season is to have people like him so they want to keep him around.
Yep.
That's how he's playing. And this was an excellent way to continue that. It doesn't make it a disingenuous move, but it is also very in keeping with the style of play that he has chosen.
Yes, I liked it. I thought it was a good, like you said, a good gameplay from him, and also a thing that he enjoyed doing. And it's nice when those align.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Oftentimes we see that align in a negative way, where it's like, oh, someone says it's their gameplay to cause chaos when the reality is they just don't know what to do, and so they just do whatever.
Right.
Or, my gameplay is to not make friends when really you're just being kind of a dick.
Yeah. I'm probably not going to make friends anyway, so I'm just going to go ahead and make sure.
Right. Yeah, it's all cutthroat. So this was nice to see like a more positive version of that alignment of, well, this is what I feel like doing, and it also works with my gameplay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, that's one of the things that we see over and over again in these various seasons, is that when someone is trying to do a strategy that doesn't come naturally, it almost always fails, as opposed to someone who can just say, look, I know what my personal strengths and weaknesses are, and so I'm going to make my strategy work with those instead of coming up with something that makes sense but that I can't pull off.
Yep.
So in any case, I was amused later because I put a note here just saying, this was a nice bonding for the group. And then we cut over to Steven saying, oh, they're probably all bonding over there.
Yep.
I laughed when Abby said, get over it, Debbie Downer.
She had some classic lines in this one.
Yeah.
Because, the one, and they played it up so well when they had, like, Savage's, like, heart-to-heart with the camera about how happy he was to make the merge, and that was one of his life dreams. And then at the end when he was leaving, she goes, hey, at least you made the merge.
Yeah.
And he goes, yeah.
You know what? And what's amazing about that and interesting about it, I think, coming from Abby, is that obviously he read it as kind of a fuck you.
He responded with that.
Yes. But I'm not convinced that that's actually how she meant it. I'm not sure.
No,
because I would
that's
believe
part of why I've started to like her a little bit more now that she's not annoying, is
yeah,
she does seem to have a very similar sense of humor to me, and like that's what, like, where that's kind of the fun of it, is when you're right on that borderline and it's something that's kind of a jerk off thing to say, and you're kind of saying fuck you, but you don't really deliver it that way, and you don't really mean it.
Yeah, like
I do that a lot. Yeah.
Well, I think it's something that a lot of people do, just this bit where you come up with something that's kind of fun to say and funny to say, and like you're trying to commiserate, he's mad, he's upset, wouldn't it be funny if I said this? And then there's a little part of your brain that says, oh, I don't think he's actually going to like that. But that part of your brain is, it's all very quiet in the distance, and all of a sudden you're already saying it, and then you go, oh, well, okay, I guess I'm committed now. She didn't seem terribly upset by his response.
No, because she knew that's the kind of response that she would get for that.
Yeah. But yeah, get over it, Debbie Downer. I agree, and I think I said this last time too, that with her calms down a little bit and not being so paranoid all the time, I like her a lot better.
Yeah.
Although I think to some extent it's just we've seen less of her when she's not making drama. But I did like that. In any case, though, he is bummed. He's having a real low moment, as he says. He talks to Jeremy about getting out Joe if they can. And rather than, wasting time on Sierra and Abby as easier targets, but when there are real threats in the game. And again, as Jeremy has been most of the times that people have approached him with some kind of a move, he's just kind of like, okay, I see your point. I don't think it's time to do that yet.
Yeah.
And, and there's something to that, but Steven, of course, is also in a position of realizing it's always going to feel too early until it's too late.
Yeah. He knows how that works. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he's a little frustrated, but he also is not willing to push it hard enough to alienate his key allies here. So Stephen also kind of pitches Spencer just to see if he can kind of build a consensus that might persuade Jeremy. Spencer is... it's weird because he kind of offers agreement in the abstract, but Spencer also knows that he's not in a position to dictate any moves. He needs to just be in the, well, if you're asking my opinion, I think this, but I'm not going to be pushy about it. You know, that's where Spencer needs to be right now. Yeah. And so, go ahead.
I think Spencer, you know, I know we've talked about it, but he is playing very well. He has not been dealt awesome hands.
Mm-hmm.
He's made it work. He did a phenomenal job of navigating that swing vote last time as a position of strength and then extracting himself from that piece.
Yeah. You know, nobody even talked about him this week.
Nope. He wasn't talked about as a swing vote. He wasn't talked about as something that, like, you know, you didn't have to keep convincing him. You know, he sort of blended into the middle, and people who want to talk strategy know they can approach him and get an honest answer. And he handled that really well too. I mean, he's playing a hell of a game, you know?
Well, and it was interesting, his confessional too, where he's kind of not only agreeing in principle with Stephen that, yeah, you know, we're going to have to get Joe out when we can, but also kind of just expressing, boy, Stephen's over there. He's playing. He's thinking this stuff through. He's paying attention. Which in some ways, it's a mixed blessing to have people notice that, especially other strategists. However, when Stephen broaches this to Tasha, she also is somewhat receptive, maybe willing to consider talking about it, but Savage overhears. Savage not on board. It's interesting to consider what Savage's response might have been if he had just been approached face to face instead of overhearing it like that. You know what I mean? Because when he overhears it, he's more inclined to think that I'm going to be the one that's left out of this decision.
Yeah.
Which is probably accurate in this case. But, you know, at the same time, you know, if they had consensus from everybody else, they probably would have let him know. I don't know, because his reaction, his extreme reaction and his promise on his children to never vote Joe's name down might indicate that he would, even if everyone else was in favor of it, he wouldn't have been on board. And of course, disrupting the whole plan of a blindside would really, that's the only way it works.
Yeah. I found it amusing that it was on like his kids' names or lives or whatever he said. These are the same kids that like uttered, "Oh my gosh, he's perfect."
Yeah. Yeah.
About Joe.
That's true. I've forgotten that.
Because they're his teenage daughters. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So in any case, Savage goes and warns Joe about the potential blindside. They're both pretty sure that they need to target Stephen for trying to initiate this. And then, of course, Joe, not that he wasn't aware of this already, but it's also just kind of like, oh, yep, okay, it's time. I already knew I was kind of going to have to try to win every immunity anyway, but it's already happening. You know. Yep. Let's see. Okay, so I think we're already at the immunity challenge. And so my notes are confusing here. So it was interesting that it was the second episode in a row where having to keep a ball on a little platform was a primary component of the challenge.
Right.
Not that that's a problem necessarily. It, of course, led to the discussion of Joe and Keith's balls later, as we discussed a little bit already. So the repeat in this case was that Jeremy and Keith had done it before, and that time Jeremy was the first out and Keith won. You know, it's interesting. I'm just also recognizing that I feel like I think sort of instinctively as Jeremy, I think of him as someone that would be good in challenges, but I'm trying to remember if there's actually any evidence of that. I don't know if we've really seen him do that many individual immunities challenges.
No, because he didn't make it that far.
Yeah. So I don't know. I wonder. But in any case, this time he is not the first out. Wentworth and Sierra go out almost immediately.
He's not far behind, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with a variety of people going out in the first round, we narrow down to the last 5 are Keith, Joe, Spencer, Tasha, and Kimmy. And so then Kimmy, Tasha, and Spencer go out next, with Keith versus Joe being the last one. And Keith having won the last time, it is kind of just interesting that was apparently not a fluke. You know, he is just good at this.
Yeah. Yes.
And yet it provided a lot of tension because we know Keith had won it once before and he's doing well again. Joe is awesome, but Joe is also the one that has to win.
Yes.
So that there was some nice tension there that was also pleasantly alleviated by all the discussion of balls.
Yeah, and I can tell you it played really well because not only those of us that are invested in this that watched it, I watched this episode with my fiance who, you know, familiar with how the show mechanics work, but doesn't really watch every episode with me. Mm-hmm. And she was like on the edge of her seat, like, come on, Joe, like, I don't even know anything about you, but like, I know I want you to win because you're in danger and you seem like a cool guy. Yeah.
He's perfect.
Yeah, she didn't say that, but you know, just the fact that, like, yeah, you know, he had been teed up as the one that had to win, and mm-hmm. So the dramatic tension was there even without all the backstory. Like, just watching this one episode, it really played out really well, you know. Mm-hmm. And it was funny. I mean, it was funny. I mean, we both giggled about the balls thing. Like, we laughed at Spencer, who like made it pretty far, but looked so uncomfortable the whole time. He was just like, you know, like Joe and Keith are both very like kind of late. You know, Joe's got his little lean on. Keith's just kind of hanging back. And mm-hmm. Spencer's like super tight like this. You know? Mm-hmm. It was just a great like look at their personalities.
Yeah.
You know? So it worked. It all worked.
Yep.
It was fun.
So in any case, Joe wins again, and he had to, but of course, you know, every win is also just going to solidify this idea that he might just win all of them.
Yeah, yes.
It's tough, but people absolutely were talking about him, and who knows how that might have gone if he hadn't won this time.
Yeah, but who also knows how much the talk will ramp up since they're like, yeah, hey, remember we started talking about that? And he won again.
Yeah. He maybe should have not won last time. But I don't know. At any point that you decide to not try to do your best in a challenge is always fraught.
Yeah. Or he could do exactly what they're afraid that he's going to do and try to win every single one. Like,
yeah.
Why not?
Well, and honestly, that's what we as the audience want to see anyway, right? Like nobody, like it's not fun to watch someone not do their best on purpose.
Right. Yeah, we've seen some really awkward versions of that. And
yeah.
Cool.
So in any case, Joe does win again. Steven's white whale. And then, of course, Joe is primed to go after Steven for bringing him up. So Joe and Savage go over, talk to, they plan to talk to Jeremy and maybe have a couple more on their alliance to try to get out Steven. And even potentially, at this point, they're discussing, like, if we need to, we'll even maybe bring in those bottom 3 girls to do it, if that's what it takes. Which is interesting that they would go there, just because it really implies they are willing to break the Bion thing altogether if it means getting rid of Steven.
Yes.
Because it's one thing to say, collectively, Bion has decided to reject Steven for being a traitor. It's another thing to say, okay, we're actually going to go outside the group to get the numbers. But which is also kind of what's funny when anybody ever is talking about, oh yeah, we've just got this nice, tight, strong alliance. It's all just nonsense, because every single person in it has at least at one point talked about, throwing it out the window. It's just like it's a lie agreed upon that it's actually a tight alliance. In any case, Joe is talking to the girls, trying to also play nice with them. One of the other benefits of that, too, is that if he makes them think he'll work with them to do something, then they're less likely to be, they couldn't go after him this time anyway, but, he wants them to feel like he's on their side.
Right.
So they talk about going after Steven. Wentworth is, of course, on board with that. She is in big favor of a secret plan to vote out somebody other than her. Sierra is also on board. And then Savage is talking about getting Steven to Wigglesworth and Tasha when Jeremy comes up. But Jeremy is not on board and is sufficiently persuasive that the whole plan falls apart. Which is interesting, because Jeremy, his game is so low key in the sense that he's never making drama, but even when people are proposing alternatives, he ends up just kind of shutting them down, just with a sort of like, I don't know, maybe we do that later. And then just like even when that doesn't necessarily make sense to the people he's talking to, makes sense for him.
Yeah.
But, he just like, he just has kind of this effortless leadership of that group that they defer to him almost without even realizing they're doing it. Nobody wants him to be mad.
Yeah, that's true. That is weird.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think it's, we've got to give the due respect to Jeremy for just that demeanor and that level of control. And in some ways, it's like what Savage did poorly when he tried to have Sierra be the decoy.
Yes.
Because, of course, Jeremy is just in the position of saying, Steven is one of the bullets in my gun. It's like he thinks through all of this strategy stuff, and then I can kind of talk with him, and he's like my aide, my Secretary of Defense.
Just like he was for JT.
Yeah. And not only that, but Jeremy is not super on board with voting out Joe yet, because he's thinking of Joe as like the shield. He's thinking, gosh, but when Joe goes out, then they're going to start looking around for who's the other golden boy or that needs to be gotten rid of, the person that's a big threat. So as long as Joe's the big threat, it's not Jeremy.
Yep.
And so he doesn't want either of them gone, and he's managing to say, I hear what you're saying. and you're making some good points, but we're not going to do that yet. And I think that's maybe what's allowing him to convince them.
Yeah, because he's not arguing with them.
Yeah, he's not saying they're wrong. He's just saying, let's wait on that. Let's put a pin in it and come back to it later.
Which hopefully doesn't bite him in the ass, and people eventually are like, you know what? We don't agree with what Jeremy wants to do, and there's enough of us to just get rid of him.
Well, the risk, of course, is that exactly the reasons that everybody else has talked about wanting to get out Steven or Joe is Joe might win every immunity challenge, they might be unable to get him out altogether, and then he might win the game. Steven, I think, is less likely that he would win the game at this point, but
he's gonna fuck up your game.
Yeah, but he's the one that like knows everything about what you're doing and is just kind of squirrely enough that if he feels threatened, might do something unexpected. So that's the risk, is by bringing them along, that's potential danger too. But, as long as he feels like he can maintain control there, which he certainly seems to be accomplishing so far, because Joe and Savage seemed pretty determined to go after Steven, and yet he apparently, Jeremy talked them out of it, or at least for now.
Yep.
Let's take out another girl before trimming the fat on our side. But, why? It's not like they need the numbers. But, in any case, Spencer kind of makes the point that, okay, I hear what you guys are saying about Steven, but I think we know what Steven wants to do, and he's not going to be able to do it without our help. So if all we have to do is just not let him move that plan forward, and he's going to continue to vote with us.
Spencer's a smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
That is 100% accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you said, Steven's not going to go and we saw it. He wasn't willing to go and go with Sierra, Abby, and Wentworth and them to try to get rid of Joe just because he wants that to happen. Yeah. He also doesn't want to put himself into that position.
Well, the other thing is too that it was all off the table because Joe won. If Joe hadn't won immunity, who knows what Steven might have been willing to do at that point. But it's hard to argue those hypotheticals.
Yeah. Too
many variables in play. But in any case, the new consensus seems to be back on the idea that it's Kelly Wentworth or Sierra. So Tasha is the one that kind of goes back to Joe. It's interesting that Joe wasn't in that other conversation. You know what I mean? He's still a little bit of an outsider on this, which is why I think when Sierra is trying to describe this central leadership core, she's not sure about Steven or Joe.
Yeah, I thought that made her point more effective.
Yeah.
Jeremy's
reply was weak nonsense. I admire him for doing what he can to try to refute her argument, but it was not an effective refutation.
No. Like I said, I think it made her point even more when she was like, yeah, there's this core and there's all these people on the bottom, and it's these three and then sometimes this and sometimes this. And they're like, well, then obviously it's not a type 4. And it's like, no. That's the whole point, is you guys kind of float back and forth, but you've got, But there's 5 or 6 other people who aren't even in that conversation.
And her target audience there is not the people in that group anyway. Right. So exactly. She doesn't have to persuade Jeremy because Jeremy knows. In any case, so Tasha reports back to Joe and says, okay, look, we talked about it. The consensus is that we don't want to get out Steven yet. Wentworth is irritated and feels so like when Joe reports back to her, look, I don't think I can make it happen. She's feeling, it seemed like she was acting angry at Joe for not pushing hard enough, but I wonder if that was just because she felt like she was on the chopping block and she was frustrated.
Yeah, well, I mean, think of her swing of emotions. It went from you're on the bottom to we have this new plan to get out one of those potentially core four to, yeah, that's not going to work. Like, of course she's going to have like that kind of reaction. I don't think she was genuinely angry at Joe for not trying hard enough. Like,
yeah,
she understands where, how this game works. Like, it took her from chopping block to a little bit of hope and some security to back on the chopping block.
Yeah.
But to her credit, she navigated the next part pretty damn well.
Yeah. So one brief note, we've actually got a few live viewers with us. Thank you guys for watching live. And if you go to the Q&A app within the Hangout menu, you can ask us live questions and we can respond live. If you feel like it, you can also just watch passively. That's fine. We're glad to have you.
No, go ahead and keep watching passively.
So let's see. I lost my place in my notes. Okay, so Wentworth then is feeling like, okay, well, shoot, that plan is not working. But even though they didn't really talk about the idea that whether the group was or was not going to split the vote, they definitely made an agreement amongst themselves to say, look, like whatever happens, we need to all vote for the same person to have any chance of anything. And so it seems like she asks, like, what do you guys think, Stephen or Savage? Which again is just a reminder too that Stephen could have had them thinking positively of him instead of potentially targeting him. Which is really just that's I think a failing on his part. But of course he's just trying to balance, keeping options open versus keeping his current allies happy.
Well, and to me, I thought it was more amazing that Jeremy didn't come up in that conversation.
Yeah.
When he's the one that shut down the whole idea that would have saved them without the idol.
I wonder if it's not as obvious to the people on the beach how much Jeremy is dictating the decisions. Maybe
it has to not be.
Right.
Or he would have come up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not like, and that's the thing, it's not like when Joe came back, he said, yeah, this was all good until Jeremy came up. Because even if he'd said that, they would have picked up on it and said, well, maybe. So it was like you said, it's Savage and him are saying and doing a lot of the same things. But Savage comes across a little more bullyish, and Jeremy comes across as persuasive because, like, Savage doesn't say it the way that like you outlined it. Like, I hear what you're saying. You make some good points. Let's not do that right now. Savage does it with a much more direct and abrasive, like, no, here's what we're doing. You're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and this is going to work. And that's why he ended up with the target and not Jeremy when they were playing. And they weren't saying the same things to do, but they talk kind of the same way to people, but there's nuances to it that made a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess at this point, I mean, we know, and Kelly had to know, that as long as they weren't splitting the vote, which they seemed like pretty sure that, like, so even though she was really telling Sierra and Abby, hey, let's just do this just in case, she knew that she was quite possibly going to play the idol, which meant that whoever they're voting for might well be the person to go home. And so they're definitely in a position well, and I guess that's what they would be thinking anyway. You know what I mean? It's like they don't know that the idol might make it more likely, but they still have to be choosing who they would like to see go. So do you think they made the right decision?
Based on what they were thinking about, yes. Like, but that's what my point just a minute ago is for them, honestly, I think Jeremy would have been the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's the one that's sort of like, let's keep, Savage has talked about wanting to play old school and keep things together, but he's also noticing the people who are less likely to stay in that, mm-hmm. and more open to going against that. He's a little bit more abrasive about doing it, but Jeremy has been undermining these whole conversations for a while. He's really the one that's like, no, y'all gonna do what I want to do, which is let me take Joe and Steven as far as I feel like taking them. Mm-hmm. He just doesn't present it that way. So he's leaving them no options, and he probably would have been the better choice for them to pull that plug. Yeah.
1 second. What are you doing? Sorry for that brief interruption. I had to make sure that my little dog wasn't digging through the garbage. Yeah, so I agree, especially, because Jeremy too is like, not only is he apparently dictating things more than anybody there on the beach seems to realize, but also just he seems to really be, like, even in this tribal council, he's the public face of trying to say, oh no, well, I guess they're all sort of saying, oh no, we're the tight five, but he's the one that's really pushing it. I think Savage is a pretty good choice, though, failing that, because first of all, Savage is the one that kind of blew up the idea of possibly voting Joe. I don't know if you still hear that. I'm rooting around and up on a pizza box. So, Elena, come here. Good girl, Elena. Okay. Savage is the one that kind of blew up the idea of possibly blindsiding Joe. Savage has that kind of bond with Tasha from when they were both kind of isolated together. So Savage is kind of like a secondary locus of that group. You know what I mean? I feel like Jeremy is the other one.
Right. That's why I say, given the information that they had, that was the right decision. Mm-hmm. Him over Steven is better for them.
Yeah, I agree. So in any case, we're going to tribal council with very little settled, and I have in my notes, it's like, if I didn't know that it was going to be Savage, I never would have guessed at this point. But of course, you
also can't watch it. You did know, and you were looking for clues that would have mm-hmm. given you that. It didn't seem, when you watch it without knowing, it didn't seem that out of place. Like,
well, no, I mean, it obviously made perfect sense when it happened, but I guess I just still wasn't thinking about. I guess maybe I was just too primed to assume that they would split the vote, and that therefore even playing an idol might save Kelly, but it wouldn't have that dramatic reversal. I mean, I eventually figured out that must be what happens, but I was still kind of going into the tribal council, I was saying, does Savage just majorly screw something up in the tribal council that makes everybody turn against him? Which seemed unlikely, but
watching it cold, or live, or however you want to say it felt pretty obvious that it was either going to be Kelly, Sierra, or Savage. And that what we were rooting for was that Kelly and Sierra would somehow guess correctly who to give the idol to. It didn't feel like they were going to split the vote. And I understand what you're saying. Like, it seemed obvious that they were. Watching it, like, without having all those other, like, things in your head that I think you were going into, it really felt like they weren't splitting the vote.
Yeah, well, certainly they never talked about it.
No, they never talked about it. It felt like they were going to make a call, and it didn't feel like it was going to be that overwhelming, but it made sense that it was, that, like, literally everybody except, like, the three of them would vote one way. And it just made it, at the end, it made it make more sense. Like, clearly they weren't, like, whatever, 8 people or whatever voted for Wentworth. They couldn't have kept it that much of a secret. Like, she clearly knew it was her.
Yeah. And
she played it very well because she didn't raise any kind of fuss and didn't, Sierra was the one doing all the, stomping her feet and pounding her fists about why you shouldn't be doing this, and, and just flailing at it. Where Wentworth knew she was going to be the one that was going to be voted for and knew it wasn't going to go down like that if that's how it happened. And she handled it without any kind of arrogance or, like, didn't tip anybody off.
I was amazed at the bit where she was saying there's a central 4, and then Probst is like, so who is it? She's like, well, I'm not going to say, because like someone approached me, and I'm not going to say who that is because I might still be here, and I'm going to want to be able to work with them, and I'm not going to want them to be mad at me for blowing up their move. Or I don't want them to accuse me of lying and be mad at me, or, whereas Sierra was a little more willing to name names. But I think at that point she was more confident that it wasn't her.
Right. Well, that's sort of the thing is, like, Sierra was confident that it wasn't her that time. So Sierra was making plays not to change tonight's vote, but to keep planting seeds so that she could work with people in the future. Whereas Kelly knew they're all voting for me, but I've got to work with them because they're still going to have a majority against me if they want to. Because they could easily do that. If they just said, you know what, fuck you for using your idol, we're going to vote you out next time, they could do that.
Yeah. Well, so, that's one of the things that's interesting to consider this time, just because as exciting as this was to have Savage go home as a surprise, I still feel like this was not quite a blindside. It was certainly a surprise, but a blindside, I don't know. I guess maybe an idol play could qualify as a blindside. They didn't expect that coming. It wasn't a betrayal, but
yeah, I think that's a blindside.
Fair enough. But in any case, they're still vastly outnumbered. And a big chunk of those people are not going to be happy that Savage is gone because of this trick they pulled. Even though it's completely within the rules of the game, it's not going to make them inclined to say, oh, well, I'm so impressed with you pulling out that idol and voting out my ally. Let's be best friends.
Right.
So they're going to be in trouble next time.
Undercurrent of tension against other people, Joe and Steven, that if they maneuver this correctly, it could start to become who is Joe or Steven more threatening, and which kind of faction wants to use these three to make their ends be met, But what they don't realize is that the person who keeps saying chill out is still there.
Yeah. So
that's why I think Jeremy would have been the better vote for them.
The one bit
Savage would have been open.
Yeah. So like the one criticism I have of Jeremy this time, and it's not even really a criticism as much as just an acknowledgement that it was a weak argument, was when she's basically, Sierra is saying, nope, it's this group. It's Jeremy, Tasha, Savage, and then Steven or Joe, and then he's trying to well, see, you said 4, which she didn't. That was Kelly, but in any case, it's but so you don't even know what you're talking about. But again, it's that is such a weak defense. And I think that he was just a little bit taken off guard of oh shit, she just called it.
Yeah.
Right down to, well, who are the people that have been discussed as possibly being eliminated earlier? Steven or Joe.
Yep.
So in any case, he didn't defend that super well, other than to just continue spouting the party line, which is no, we're just it's all of us as an alliance and that sort of thing. And then Sierra's just pointing out, it's for the people in charge, saying that there's nobody in charge is an excellent strategy. Then she also gave some epic eye rolls whenever Savage was talking.
Oh man, the cross-eyed thing that she would do.
Yeah. She was not a fan. Savage and Sierra really just, that one exchange seems to really just completely poison the well between those two.
Yep.
Which I think we have to put on Savage. And obviously it's not necessarily a direct connection, but it's certainly not entirely unrelated that he was their choice because they don't like him. Yeah. It's also what ended up making that previous vote backfire when they took out Wu.
Yep.
So I think this was just a lingering effect of that. I liked also that it was Stephen brought up a return to the discussion from, was it just last episode or maybe the previous one, of is this how Survivor works anymore? Do you need an alliance, or is it just these constantly shifting voting blocks? And then Stephen's kind of trying to make the case that is what it is. It's not these tight alliances. It's not a hierarchy or a totem pole. It's really all different and all free flowing. And then Sierra's just of course you would say that. You're at the top.
Yeah, you're in that top of the
inner circle. Yeah. So all of that was pretty good, and I did figure out by the end of the tribal council what must be going to happen. And I think you may be right that I was so focused on looking for clues for how things might turn against Savage that I was maybe missing or picking up on the other elements of remember, Wentworth has her idol. They don't seem to be talking about splitting the vote, and so I might have picked up on that sooner otherwise. But in any case, it made for, I think, what must be Probst's favorite way to read votes is to read a whole bunch of votes for one person and say does not count ever after all of them.
That might be the most does not count votes I've ever seen.
9.
That has to be that's got to be the most.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. So in any case, the total number of votes, 9 for Wentworth, and then 3 for Savage. Only 2 of them were red because that's all they needed. Yeah, so well, first of all, the moment where Wentworth plays it and everybody is just so it's funny that because at that moment nobody knows who the new target's going to be yet, we don't have that same sort of crestfallen reaction that we might have expected. So at that point, it's still sort of this abstract, whoa, we didn't see that coming. And then it takes a moment to realize, oh, wait, this could be bad.
Yeah, one of us is going. Yeah.
This is kind of this reminder of Oh, right. We didn't split the vote, did we? And then Sierra declares this her favorite moment. I thought that was pretty funny.
I can imagine so.
Yeah. But Savage, not happy. Understandable. Especially given that in this context, it's got to feel like collateral damage or a fluke. I think from our perspective, it's not really. But for him, it's got to feel a little bit just like it came out of nowhere. He didn't even get a chance to know that he was in any danger.
Right. From his perspective, they were set up to win 9-3.
Yeah.
And because of this other thing, 3-0 wins.
Yeah.
You can see why he was a little taken aback by that.
Yeah. So I was noting here though that they're still in rough shape for next time. Abby and Sierra and Wentworth. But then
they are, but at the same time,
it's
people are willing to constantly shift. And if
there
Joe
certainly was
immunity,
I think that could certainly make a big difference.
Yeah.
But of course, and we also kind of talked about it a little bit. But Abby's little, at least you made it to the jury, and he just flips her the bird. All right, back at you. So that was kind of interesting. One note in an interview afterwards, Savage mentioned that there had been part of the extra reason for his extreme displeasure leaving was that he didn't especially like Cass, and apparently there was kind of some hostile body language between the two of them during tribal council that we didn't see.
We saw some of it.
Some of it, yeah. But in any case, part of what it was is this idea of not only am I going out, but now I have to go to Ponderosa with just Cass. So he's just kind of extra not happy. And so in that mood was where he just he did not even want to hear anything. And it almost didn't matter if Abby was being sarcastic or not. It was almost just don't talk to me.
I can see that.
Yeah. So next time, everybody is looking for the replacement idol, but the preview implies that that's what the advantage is. But the idea of actually offering it in the middle of a challenge instead of it being like an auction reward or something is kind of interesting. Especially since it's not a guarantee. It's not like when they're offering peanut butter or something. It's everybody who steps down now gets peanut butter. But it's not only do you have to step down from the challenge, but that's not even a guarantee. You have to be the first to get there.
Yep.
That's kind of exciting.
I think it'll be exciting.
So in his final words, Savage acts like he didn't really think he made any mistakes. But I think...
technically, you could see his perspective. He was set up in a 9-3 advantage. You could see that, how he could see he didn't make any mistakes.
Yeah.
Now, he has a little bit of a blind spot to the fact that he obviously pissed off enough people that they were willing to choose him when they wanted to flip this over. So, yes, he did make some mistakes. I'm not saying he didn't, but I can definitely appreciate why he would feel at the time like he had.
Yep.
He had put himself in a majority of 9-3.
Yep. So I think that does it for this episode of Talking About Survivor. Thank you, everybody, for listening and or watching, including our live viewers tonight. And if you are hearing me speak right now, then you know where you can find this version, whether it's the audio or the video that you're watching. But the way that, I say this all the time, and now it feels awkward. The YouTube version goes on my YouTube channel and gets posted at christianaellis.com. The audio version also gets posted as a podcast at christianaellis.com. All right. I'm doing a weird gesture with my hand like I'm playing desk football or something. Like making a little field goal thing. So, good night, everybody.
Good night.